Hi BookTube, my name is Juan, I am just one reader, and today I will be doing my reading wrap-up for the month of August in this weird year that is 2020. So I managed to complete 12 books in August, which is a pretty good number, but I have to confess I don't feel as completely satisfied with my reading this month. Mainly because I realize now, looking back, that I went for books on my TBR, I selected books on my TBR that were easy to get through, and that means more quantity of books read per month, but sometimes the quality left me a little bit disappointed, if not frustrated. So in here, you will see a mix of varying opinions towards this book. Some of them I really did not like. Some of them, there was one DNF actually, and the other books, some of them were not so great, and then I only had like a couple of really, really good ones. But c'est la vie, and you have to learn from your decisions, the decisions that you make in regards to your reading. I, for one, can really tell you that I feel like now I feel more confident in including in my TBR books that are longer and maybe appear more challenging, but I know that those books will be just better in the long run, and I shouldn't be concerned or thinking about if a book is short or easy to get through, more accessible. I really need to make a better TBR for the next month, for September, choosing more carefully and maybe choosing less quantity of books but better quality. So that's what I have learned in this month. So in this video, I will go over everything that I read, including one DNF, which is, I think, the only book that I have DNF'd in like a year or something like that. But it was such... It was so obvious that I needed to DNF this book, so you will see why. So I will mention all of these books very briefly. I have 12 books that I finished and one DNF, so I will not be able to go into a lot of depth because this video would last forever. If you want to hear more of my thoughts regarding one book or some of these books in this list, I would refer you back to my previous videos. I think I have talked quite extensively about all of them. Before I actually begin, I just want to include David Copperfield by Charles Dickens, because that's a book that I started reading in August. It's a very long book. I think it's one of Charles Dickens's longest novels, if not the longest. I started reading this book in August, and I am loving it. I am just not including it in this video properly because I am still reading it. I'm halfway through the novel, so I will be reading that as a longer project, and I will probably take my time with it. But I just wanted to mention it briefly here. Now, let's get started, and let's start at the very beginning. A very bad place to start. The first book that I will be mentioning today is the one book that I DNF'd. So I realize now that what I will be doing today is I will rank the books that I read in August. So I will start with my DNF, which was obviously the book that I hated the most. And then I will work my way up onto, my last book mentioned will be my favorite of the month. So this is going to be a ranked reading wrap-up. So the first book and the one that I DNF'd was A Peculiar Peril by Jeff Vandermeer. I was very excited about this book. I was really, really interested in it when I saw it on a video from Eric from Lonesome Reader. He was mentioning this book, and it sounded like a great, great adventure fantasy story. I feel so disappointed because the book is advertised as a fantasy, like a traditional fantasy with a bizarre twist. Um, but just look at this cover. It's absolutely beautiful. It's one of my favorite covers that I've seen recently. And also there's a thing here, a quote here on the cover that says, perfect for fans of Neil Gaiman and Patrick Rothfuss. I love both of those authors. And let me tell you, I feel robbed. I feel so cheated and betrayed by the marketing ploys of the publishing universe. This book was horrible. I only managed to read 2 chapters and it was instantaneous. It was almost an automatic response. I could just realize that this book was not for me, and I don't think it's going to be for many people, really. It's the writing is so over the top and confusing, and sometimes it feels like the author is just trying too hard to be clever and have a sort of Dickensian style with the language, but at the same time it's very off-putting because the actual story is very middle grade or young adult. So it didn't make any sense. It was horrible to read, and I immediately put it back on the shelf after 2 small chapters. Very disappointing. So now let's move on to the books that I actually completed, even though some of them, especially the first 3 that I will be mentioning, I really didn't like. Firstly, A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. This book is a highly praised book in the realm of horror, thriller genre. So I was really looking forward to it. I had heard great things about it. The premise is really interesting, and that's really what drew me into it. It's about this family, and one of their daughters is possessed by a demonic spirit, or she has schizophrenia, she has schizophrenia. And they get involved with this reality TV show with an exorcist. The exorcist goes to their home, and it's a book that I think relies really heavily on its concept, which is a very interesting concept, but it doesn't really do anything really well. The execution is just really mediocre. It was very boring. It was very over the top in a bad way. I really didn't like the writing. I thought the ending was so predictable, and it's just a book that made me laugh unintentionally. I gave it like 2 stars. It's just not good. Next up, I have The Language of Dying by Sarah Pinbrough. This is actually blurbed by Neil Gaiman himself, so another weird Neil Gaiman reference in one of the books that I read this month that turned out to be incredibly disappointing. This book follows the story of this woman who is watching or witnessing her father die. So it's a story about grief. It's also her reminiscing, her looking back on her life, and we see the family dynamic, and I can see sort of what the author was trying to accomplish here, but in the end, I found this book incredibly melodramatic and sentimental, and it's one of those books that immediately after I put it back down on the shelf after having finished it, I was like, no, 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 no. I gave it 2 stars. I commend the author for her intentions, and some of the writing was interesting, some of the family dynamic was interesting, but the book itself, I think, completely failed. Next up, I have another book that I feel very, very similarly about, and that is Everything I Never Told You by Celesting. This book is another very interesting book in terms of its themes, the subject matter, the way the characters interact. So if I were to tell you what this book is about, you would think, oh, that sounds like a great book, except it is not a great book. It is a very, very bland book, in my opinion. The writing felt very simplistic and bland to me, although it was very readable and very easy to just keep turning the page. The characterization I really did not like. I thought it was very cheesy, and again, over sentimental and melodramatic and unbelievable to the point of and the ending is the most predictable ending out of all of these books that I will mention here today. So this is not a good book. I can see why some readers have enjoyed it because I think what those readers have seen in this book is the subject matter, the themes, the values, and the interesting conversation that this book tries to open with the reader about race and class and some other things, but the book itself failed miserably for me. Then I have a book that, okay, now we're getting into books that were better. This was another 2-star. Now we're getting into 3-star Kingdom. So my first or my lowest 3-star rated book was The Humans by Matt Haig. This book really tried, but it failed. It's like one of those rockets or spaceships that, they are launched. And just when you see they're just going there and they're breaking into the atmosphere, they crash and burn and you want to kill yourself. This book was, maybe I'm exaggerating, but this felt very much like that. This book started out really great. It has a great premise. It has a great concept. It's about an extraterrestrial being, so an alien, who comes down to Earth and starts observing human life and human existence in many, and we get many observations about our human life, and they are very sharp, very amusing, and very interesting. I really liked that because it's very funny, it's hilarious, but it's also very true. And the author manages to make a critique or an observation of many aspects of human interaction and human conditions. But so that was very good. But then, sort of halfway through the book, it just the book just didn't know what to do. The story became so melodramatic and so corny. I wanted to kill myself. Like, it was so sweet and sugary, and of course the alien starts seeing how amazing humankind is and how amazing the human condition can be with all its flaws, and it's the flaws that make our existence beautiful. Yes, I agree with those messages, but the book just turned into something else that it was not. So it was just a very mixed experience, and it was awful. The ending was awful. I was laughing out loud because it was so sugary and corny. So I gave it 3 stars just because the beginning was very good. Then, The Ascent of Rum Doodle by W.E. Bowman. This is a British cult classic. It was written in the 1950s. And it's basically a spoof or satire about a bunch of men, British gentlemen, who go to the Himalayas to climb a peak, which is like a little bit like Mount Everest. This is Rum Doodle, the Himalayan peak. And it's just fun, silly, it's entertaining, it's good fun. However, I did find that it was difficult for me to follow the plot or to care about the characters because it is very much about the humor and not much else. So I found myself constantly drifting away from the story and just going in different tangents. So it was hard for me to actually pay attention to the book because the story was not really that solid. So if you enjoy British humor, which I really do, I think you will enjoy this, but just beware because this is just silly humor and it's fine, but it doesn't do that much else. I gave it 3 stars. Okay, so now we're getting into the 3-star books that I actually really enjoyed. I didn't give them more than 3 stars, but they were really enjoyable 3-star books. So the first one in this category is Un psicoanalista en el diván, a psychoanalyst on the couch. This was written by Juan David Nacio. He's a very experienced senior analyst living in France. And what I liked about this book is that I think it's a very clear and concise explanation of what psychoanalysis really is. I think it will clarify many ideas that some people may have about psychoanalysis who haven't really studied psychoanalysis or looked at it from a clinical point of view. He talks a lot about clinical issues, treatment, modern psychopathology, contemporary psychoanalysis. So I really liked that he was able to introduce very simple but core ideas of psychoanalysis, modern psychoanalysis, to hopefully a younger generation of people who are more interested in psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis is growing immensely in the world, in some areas. In the United States, for example, not so much, but in some other areas in the world, like Europe, in South America, and in Mexico, psychoanalysis is just growing and growing and growing, thanks to neuroscience and some other research that really gives more value to our therapeutical approach. But anyway, I liked this book. I just thought it was a little bit simple, and that's why I gave it 3 stars. But it was very enjoyable because you feel the enthusiasm behind the writing. Next up, I have The Crime of Lord Arthur Savile and Other Stories by Oscar Wilde. This book is illustrated this is a Spanish translation, and it's beautifully illustrated. These stories are very simple. You can read this book in one afternoon. It's very charming, delightful. It also includes some social commentary and criticism. It's Oscar Wilde. He's wonderful. He has a beautiful prose. And it was a 3-star book because, I didn't get more out of it, but it was very delicious. Then I have The Idiot by Elif Batuman. This is a book that it really sort of burned my system. My nervous system was really taken hostage by this book, which I think is a very great thing to say about a book. It's very rare to feel so strongly about a book for me. And this one definitely achieved that. So that's why I am including it higher on my list, even though I didn't really enjoy it as much as I hoped I would. This story is sort of stream of consciousness. It's not exactly driven by a plot. It's a character study. It's about ideas and philosophical theories and theories about language and connection and trying to find meaning in life, which is essentially chaotic. It's a kind of anti-coming-of-age novel, which I really appreciated. I think it's a novel that defies many tropes and categories, and that's something really, really incredible to say about it. However, the experience of reading the book was not exactly my cup of tea. I found it mostly tedious, not exactly funny. I think humor is incredibly hard to do, and even if you do it right, it's very subjective, and I really didn't get the humor. So it was a mixed experience for me, but I would recommend it because it is a truly fascinating book. Okay, now we are getting into the 4-star books. These are books that I really enjoyed for different reasons. The first one is Normal People by Sally Rooney. Even though I don't think this is the most spectacular or interesting book I've ever read, as many people do, I did find that the style, the writing, and the format, so essentially the form, was very interesting. I found that the themes and the characterization and the actual storyline was a little bit tropey, young adult. I've seen it 1,000 times before. the emphasis on whether these people are actually normal or incredibly pathological, that's kind of an interesting question. But really, what I found to be the most interesting aspect of this book was the way that Sally Rooney delivered everything. The style, the writing style, how she interweaves dialogue, a lot of really fluid dialogue with scenes and backstory, and the way that she spaces everything is in a timeline is very interesting. So I mainly enjoyed that aspect of the book. Then, More Weird Things Customers Say in Bookshops by Jen Campbell, our lovely Jen Campbell from BookTube. I think that we have a sort of moral obligation to read Jen Campbell just because we are part of this community. Not really a moral obligation, but I think people should definitely read Jen Campbell, all of her books. They are all great, and they are very much dedicated to readers and the reading experience or the experience of buying books. And I think if you are watching this video or if you consider yourself a part of this community, you really should read Jen Campbell. So this book is the sequel to Weird Things Customers Say in Bookshops, which is delightful. This was just as delightful. It's a little bit more of the same, but if it's great, that we want more. So, if it ain't broken, why fix it? So this was just charming and delightful. It was also incredibly upsetting because some of the things that some of these customers do and say are unbelievable. Like, how can people be self-centered and narcissistic and sons of bitches? But at the same time, it's a book that makes me very hopeful about readers and reading and bookselling and the idea of a book as a physical object. I am a very strong supporter of physical reading. I definitely champion the physical object of a book over e-reading or audiobooks. I think that's a completely valid way of approaching a text, but the actual sensory experience of paper and text and ink is something else. So this book was great. I gave it 4 stars. My last 4-star book is one of my favorite books of the year so far, and that is Buddies by Ethan Morton. This is really spectacular, really fascinating. It's a collection of pieces, short stories, articles, essays. Some of them are very autobiographical, some of them are more fictionalized, some of them are more, essays, I guess, and ideas, pieces in which the author is thinking about certain things. So this revolves around homosexual experience specifically in Manhattan in the 1980s, but I think it actually says a lot more about homosexuality universally and the experience, the condition of being homosexual and what are its consequences, ramifications, socially, romantically, internally, in terms of identity and relationships and how people experience the world and feel competent in the world and how they feel they can move around in the world, how that has changed throughout the years. This was written, as I said, in the 80s, and so it's very interesting. It was very interesting for me to read this now, 40 years after it was published, or some of the stories were written, and it was very interesting to compare and contrast how things have changed and how some other things have not changed. This book is really fascinating. The writing is very muscular. Sometimes it feels almost academic, but it's a really interesting book. And finally, my favorite book of the month and probably my favorite nonfiction book of the year so far, one of the only books that I have given 5 stars to this year. It was absolutely perfect for me. It resonated completely with me. It felt like a very personal match for me. Razzle Dazzle, The Battle for Broadway by Michael Riedel, theater columnist of the New York Post. Razzle Dazzle is a book that has it all. It is spectacularly well researched and incredibly written. The writing is, I thought it was sort of perfect for a nonfiction book. It was enthralling, it was exciting, it was vivid, it painted the pictures in my mind perfectly, it was transportive and evocative and atmospheric. It's a book that has so many different things to enjoy. It's about the history of Manhattan, the history of Broadway, specifically the Schubert Empire, the theater district, and how back in the 70s, Broadway and Manhattan was a very creepy sort of seedy place where people didn't want to go, and it was bankrupt and it was just chaotic. And with several shows like A Chorus Line, one singular sensation, those shows really boosted the economy of the empire of Broadway and of Manhattan in the long run. It's also a book that paints the picture of show business and how they do all these business deals and negotiations, but it's so interesting and enthralling. Another thing that this book does really well is it tells you about some people, so it's a little bit biographical in terms of it tells you about some people like Michael Bennett, the creator, the director of A Chorus Line, and some people in the theater that really played an important part in making Broadway what it is. And it's just a book that has it all. I think it's very, very rare for me to enjoy nonfiction this way. So if you enjoy theater, if you enjoy Broadway, if you just enjoy good investigative journalism, this is just so wonderful. I gave it 5 stars, and he has another book coming out later this year in November, and I'm so eagerly anticipating it. And that's it. Those are all the books that I read in the month of August. Please let me know in the comment section down below if you have any thoughts about any of these, if there are any book recommendations that you have for me based on my opinions of these books. I am Just One Reader, and I will see you on the next video.